Violence against the LGBTQ community is growing, and black trans women make up a large number of the victims. According to the Transgender Homicide Tracker, black transgender women make up 73% of all transgender gun homicide victims. One of the areas we see this violence in is those who are dating and seeking relationships. As violence against transgender people and gender nonconforming people continues to rise, what responsibilities do black people, both cis and trans, have when it comes to disclosure and safety? Here to help me answer that question is Hope Giselle. She's a trans activist, a national organizer, and a diversity and inclusion specialist. Hope, my friend, so good to see you. Welcome back to the show. Talk to me about this idea of disclosure. Whenever the conversation around trans folk, particularly trans women, because let's be honest, much of this conversation is really about trans women, how important is disclosure? Because that seems to be at the center of the conversation all the time.
I think that it depends on who you're asking, right? When we talk about the idea of disclosure, it's also based on what the topic is. Folks seem to be perfectly fine with the idea of a person who has an STI or AIDS or HIV taking their time with disclosing that information because folks understand, right? Like these are things that you don't just want to throw out at people. People might need, time to process them. And so folks don't have an issue with folks not disclosing that. People don't have an issue with folks not disclosing, their truthful salary when they ask about it, or disclosing whether or not this is their actual car. But for some reason, when we talk about the idea of someone disclosing their assigned gender, we have to know at the first sight of you, or if I come up to you and I say that you're a beautiful woman and I hope that you have a good night, my response to that shouldn't be thank you. It should be I'm trans, right? And so when we have this conversation about disclosure, I think that it really depends on who we're talking to and how important the truth is as it pertains to their masculinity, their femininity, their womanhood, their manhood, and who's watching, if we're being honest.
So let's talk about that, because that's an interesting point you make, because you're right. You might say, Hope Giselle, I know you're married, but if you were single, you might say, I don't want to date a broke person, or I don't want to date a Republican, just for example, right? And when somebody tries to holler at you at the club, they don't necessarily have to walk up to you with their MAGA hat on or tell you that they ain't got no money, right? They can wait and so forth. And you may not see that as an ethical issue. You may say, just tell me at an appropriate time. The issue for many people, though, is, if someone says, I don't want to be in a romantic relationship with someone who is not cisgender, if I say I only want to be in a relationship or even date cisgendered women, do I have a right to do that? And if I try to holler at you at the club and don't know that you're a trans woman, do you have a responsibility to let me know that you're a trans woman? Not at the moment I say hello, but before we date, before we go out, so that I don't accidentally or unknowingly begin an encounter or begin a relationship that I ultimately don't want to continue.
I think that that's a very interesting concept, right? Because when we have these conversations, the thought process really isn't about the date. The thought process really usually isn't even about the activity. The thought process is about who can see this exchange take place. A lot of folks are usually embarrassed at the idea that their friend, right, their homeboys, their father, their cousin, their uncle, whomever flew in from out of town for the bachelor party is going to see you having this exchange. It's more so about the secondhand embarrassment that you're sure to get from people specifically within the Black community, or especially communities of color, once somebody finds out that the person that you were, trying to holler at or thought was attractive is a trans person. So I think that the question begs is, how soon am I supposed to disclose to save you that embarrassment? And the answer is a very rhetorical one. I can't save you the embarrassment, because the way that society is set up is that it's a no-win situation for me. If you walk up to the bar, you buy me a drink because you saw me sipping on margaritas and I accept the drink, the homeboys are going to go into laughter because they might have peeped it before you peeped it, or one of them might know me personally and now it's a key. If I don't say anything until after I've sipped the drink and we've had a great conversation, they're still going to laugh. If I don't say anything until after I get home and I text you because I was worried about my safety, now I'm disrespectful and now I should have said something. And now there is a no-win situation when it comes down to trans women. deciding how and when to offer up this information. You're just going to be upset because society has told you that you have to be upset. It's less about even getting into the actual relationship and more so about when and how do we create safe space for trans women to be able to say that and spare us both the lack of time and energy before I end up in a place where now you feel disrespected and I feel dehumanized.
So you raise an important issue that I think often gets ignored in this conversation because it becomes sensationalized. It becomes a somebody got caught or somebody's getting outed or somebody got tricked, which almost never is what's actually happening.
No.
I suspect many people actually already know that you're trans, whether they acknowledge it out loud or not, when they're dating and things like that, and they allow them, they go into a kind of plausible deniability mode. I don't doubt that.
Exactly.
And I also don't doubt that much of the reason why trans women don't disclose, particularly black trans women, in our community is because of the fear. Like you said, it might be safer to tell the person once you get home than it is to tell them in public or at a bar in front of other people or whatever, because of the way that masculinity, hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity may play out and make it impossible for you to have a healthy interaction. I acknowledge all of that to be true. My question, though, still is there a moment where I have an ethical responsibility, even keeping track of all the things that we've talked about around the dangers and the unhealthiness and the transphobia and all the things that make it difficult?
For me, because I can't speak for every trans woman, black, brown, or indifferent in this situation, I think that before or once I acknowledge that someone sees me in a romantic sense, meaning that I see that this person is looking at me like a 6-course meal, that is when I feel obligated to let you know. But I think that even with that, I'm still going to take my time and choose my settings correctly because posturing is a thing, right? And so even if I want to tell you in this sports bar where there are, several other men that are watching this exchange take place, I might not do it right in that moment because you're liable to take this same drink and throw it in my face for the sake of posturing to your friends. And so while I do believe that me personally, I would tell you as soon as I acknowledge your romantic attraction, I cannot speak for or speak to the decisions of other trans women in this particular case. But myself, I don't even think about the sex part. Once I know that you're trying to get a piece, it's my duty to let you know, like, hey, sir, just so you know, this is what it is, because you're not about to get me riled up and then turn around and make me feel like an it or a thing because you need to justify your disgust with me in order to walk away from this feeling unscathed.
And that's the piece that I'm glad you brought up, and we're going to come back to this again and again, this conversation, because it's not just why aren't trans women disclosing more, it's how do we create conditions that make it impossible to disclose? And all of that has to be on the table. Anyway, Hope Giselle, I want to thank you for joining me. As always, it's good to see you. Come on back next week. We're going to keep rapping about this stuff. The Trans Lifeline is the only suicide hotline for trans people. It's operated by trans and non-binary people. The number is right there on your screen. There is full anonymity and confidentiality. This lifeline operates 24/7.